All right, when you're ready to go to bend your sides, we're gonna need this jig here, and this jig actually will be able to bend both your sides at the exact same time. So we're gonna take these boards and we have to get them wet first. We're also gonna use some heat with the little heat blanket that we have. Place everything in the jig here and then be able to bend it. And just a quick little guide on how this works. So first, again, you're going to get your boards wet, and we'll put them in here both at the same time. And we want actually these to have this one's tapered here. And so we want a left side and a right side. In order to do that, we're going to have one of them tapered on this part, and the other one's going to be tapered over here. Now, if you're just doing the straight sides, then this doesn't matter. You just put both sides in. But if you're doing the tapered sides, which I am doing, we do need to make sure that they get put the right direction. You have your bend line that we drew on here as well. That bend line is going to have to go right in the very middle here where we bend. And the smaller part is going to be the top, and that's this part of the jig here. And this bigger part's going to be down here. So when we put these in here, I'm actually going to go this direction. These would go in here. I'd make sure my bend line is lined up right where it's at. And then we would put our heat blanket on next. After this, the heat blanket would go on. Then we would put our other metal strip here. And then we'd be ready to crank everything down and get it bent. So you would crank this middle part down. The sides have some pieces that would go on the sides. Some springs get attached on both of those, both sides, and then you would pull these down and bend them down around the side when we go to do this. So we'll show this whole process on how to bend your sides using this little jig. So just come over to my sink here and get these boards wet. They don't need to be soaking, but I like to just turn on the faucet and then just get them wet. This will help when we bend it. With the heat and the water, it'll allow these boards to bend a lot easier. So just kind of come over and get them wet completely. For the heat blanket, we've got this little control panel here, and it's just plugged in and on main power. So this number here in red says what temperature this little thermometer is at right now, which is just room temperature. And obviously if I held the tip of it, you can see the temperature going up because I'm warmer than room temperature. So the heat blanket, you have to turn it on right here. And it's set to go up to 270 degrees. So we're gonna flip that on. And so now this heat blanket's gonna start to warm up. And so when we go to turn on this heat blanket and get it going, just make sure that little thermometer is just kind of around that heat blanket so we know what temperature to get to. I would highly recommend wear some gloves because it gets really hot and you can burn yourself easily. And it'll work fairly quickly. So we'll let that warm up for just a second. The other thing I would recommend is get your boards after you've soaked them and wrap them in some tin foil the direction that they're gonna go. This tin foil will help prevent any of this metal to get some oxidation or anything that happens to the boards, and it'll protect them a little bit from getting some black marks on them later. So we just get some tin foil, get them soaked, make sure they're placed the correct direction that they need to go. Again, I'm doing the tapered one, so this one has tapered here and the other one's on the opposite side. My bend line I can see. I'm gonna make sure when I put this into my mold that that bend line is lined up right in the center part of my mold. So it's a little tricky to dip this, but we're just gonna place everything inside and get it lined up where it needs to go. So because I'm covering up my bend line, I'm just kind of placing it in here. Make sure I can open this up enough that I can see where the bend line's at before I get it too much. So I've got my bend line right here now. Boards are nice and straight, not overlapping or anything like that, and I've got my metal piece pretty much even on that. Now I'm going to go ahead and just wrap up the rest of that tin foil over top so it doesn't get any change. My heat blanket's really hot. Let me get my gloves. It's already up to temperature 270 degrees. I can see on the thing there. So be careful with this heat blanket. It's really hot. We're gonna do both sides at the same time, getting everything lined up. So we're gonna put this other metal piece on, but I'm gonna squeeze that little temperature gauge right underneath my heat blanket so you can read that, what it really is gonna be. Take your little blocks of wood, place them on. Before we do too much of connecting everything, the first thing we're gonna do is crank this center section down. So I'm gonna go ahead and crank that down all the way. And this will bend that middle part. Go pretty slow once you get pressure on it. We don't want to snap anything, so we're just going to go a little bit slow, but we do want to go down all the way. That it allows us to go. Just going slow. That water, when it heats up with that heat blanket, creates a lot of steam, and this is what allows us to bend a really sharp bend into these. I've got that down pretty much as tight as I can go. Now I'm going to take our little springs here, hook them on. There's actually one on the other side too that we're going to hook on. Get both these going. Again, it's very hot, so be careful not to burn yourself or anything. Now we're going to take these and carefully slide everything down. Slide this, again, go slow, and it's going to just bend those sides to match the shape of this mold. Move that one like that, and we'll get this one going over here. If you hear some snapping or other things like that, you just back it off a little bit, go slow. We did make that extra side in case we need another side if one of these breaks. So we've got this set up. At this point, once we've got it all here, we can go ahead and turn off the power to the heat blanket there. And really, you can even unplug that heat blanket. We don't need that anymore. If you can pull out the thermometer, that's fine too. And that way, this entire jig is just ready to go to sit here. We need to let this sit in the jig with pressure on it for at least 20 minutes. And then we can pull it out of the jig. And I've got a little mold that we're gonna put our sides in to help them keep that shape once we're done. Okay, it's been a little more than 20 minutes now. We're gonna take our sides out of the jig and get them immediately put into our little mold here. So make sure you have this ready for that. It's important to understand that we're going to do this exact opposite of the way that we did it originally. So originally we lowered this crank first and then we did the two sides. So now we're going to go ahead and undo the two sides first. Take little springs off. And then we'll undo the crank last as we go through. Springs off there. And then we'll just undo that crank. And it's going to want to spring back a little bit on you, so we got to just quickly get everything put into our mold. There we go. Heat blanket there. And go ahead and take off the tin foil as well on this. And so these should have a nice bend to them. And we'll just quickly put them into our mold. Just kind of bend into that shape. If they do break, we can always bend another one. We've got these little boards here that'll help adjust it. I've got one of my boards here that did get a little crack going on, and so I'll probably have to bend a new one here. I might need to let it soak a little longer, or perhaps leave it in the jig a little bit longer, or maybe I went too fast. These little pieces here will help keep the shape in this little mold. And you just want that to stay in that shape to help keep it to dry immediately, just that amount. So we might be able to salvage this one. Didn't really snap all the way, but it does have a little bit of a bend here, but I'll probably end up bending a new side just in case. All right, I just bent the other side because I did notice my previous one did have that little tear in it. And so I don't know if that would have worked. So I ended up just taking my extra piece that I had originally made and just bent that one. And this one actually looks like it turned out pretty good. No tears anywhere. So again, we're gonna leave all of our sides in this mold. Get those little wedge blocks in there just to kind of force it against the sides everywhere. And from this point on, we want to try to leave our sides in this mold as much as possible. So there we go, we got our sides bent.